So I would like to bring right and left together into a happy historical compromise, a third way, if you like, that will allow us to have our cake and to eat it too. I have a capitalist head, but a socialist heart.
Massey sociology lecturer Peter Beatson declares an open season on politicians in this tongue-in-cheek mock political campaign, playing the roles for all they're worth.
Okay, take it away, comrades. The people's flag is deepest red, it's shrouded of our martyred dead.
Redneck party politician Winsome Spanks.
There are enemies on your right. There are enemies on your left. Enemies everywhere. There are murderers, muggers and rapists queuing up outside your bedroom window, waiting their turn to crawl in to murder, mug and rape you.
Ken Tumotuenga takes the Maori nationalist stance.
Once again, we would have a Polynesian paradise in the South Pacific, like we had before Captain Cook came sniffing around. Remember the famous words that rang out at the siege of Oricau. E hoa mā, ko tēnei te kupu o te iwi Māori, ka whawhai tono mātau, ake, ake, ake. No reira tēnā koutou ki oro koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. The election, the speeches have been made.
And here's the moment of truth. The makeshift electorate makes its
I want
decision.
you to decide which of those speakers would make the biggest mess of the country. I'll shout out their names in turn, and you boo if you think they would make a total cock-up of things. There will be a surprise candidate at the end. So first of all, what about Sir Roger Hartless and the neoliberals? Right? What about the Social Democrats and the Yellen Carp, the Woolly Woofter Party? What about my friend Winsome Spanks? Do you like him, the redneck gentleman? Don't want him? I can't quite work it out. So as I said, we've got a surprise candidate. Little Ziggy down here wants a vote for canine liberation. So, any cheers for guide dog liberation? I believe most passionately of all, I think, in secular humanist values. I have got very little time for religion because I think it does so much harm in the world. But when I'm analysing things as a sociologist, I don't wear my heart on my sleeve and say how much I abhor suffering and how much I believe in peace and all that kind of thing. I simply try to deconstruct the way other people create realities for themselves and try to impose those realities upon us. So I guess I spend quite a lot of time debunking ideologies and cant of one sort or another. And this can get me into hot water with people who believe passionately in the theories that they espouse. Our topic for today is employment.
Peter Beatson's performance style carries over into tutorials. He's always finding ways to make them entertaining as well as educational. In this case, looking at the effects of disability on job prospects.
First of all, I want each of you to select an occupation that you would like to perform. Then I'm going to go around and I'm going to allocate you each a disability.
I'd like to be a hairdresser.
Mary, you're blind.
I'm Shannon and I want to be an interior decorator.
Yes, it's a pity that you haven't got any arms or legs, but we'll see how you go.
I'm Emma and I want to be a dentist.
Emma, and you want to be a dentist. I wonder if your severe epileptic fits will affect you in any kind of way. Well, Emma, your qualifications for the job look pretty impressive. Now, I wonder if you could tell us whether you've got any kind of disability that might disqualify you for the job.
Well, yes, sometimes I suffer from epileptic fits.
What kind of treatment do you need?
I don't really have any at this stage, but yes.
So you might say that your epilepsy is not under control, as it were.
Well,
not controlled by medication.
No, not at this stage, but I'm looking at it, yes.
And how frequently do you have these seizures?
Maybe 3-4 times a week.
And considering the basis that she's not at the moment controlling it or taking any attempt to control her illness, it's a bit of a concern.
Yes. Now, of course, we read her CV, and she has been through dental school, and she has got good qualifications, but we're frightened that when she's actually on the job, it could be dangerous. Now, I wonder what legislation says about this. There is, in fact, a Human Rights Act, which tells us that we, the employers, there are certain things that we can and we cannot do. I didn't mention it in front of Emma, but I broke one of the laws right at the start of the interview by asking her if she had a disability. I'm not actually allowed by law to do that.
Peter Beatson has a reputation for poking the stick at the cliché and status quo, the conventional wisdom. But it's a style and approach that students and colleagues find insightful and a tad inspirational.
Peter's notes are up here, and I think that's what really impresses me about Peter as a lecturer, that he can hold 55 minutes of a lecture in his head, and he doesn't have any notes referred to. And you get those pauses sometimes in his lectures when we would be looking at our notes. And I know what Peter's doing. He's reflecting, where in that memory log am I going to next? And you can see, and he'll review it. And it's a wonderful lecturer because he has such a wonderful sequence, and because, as you've probably seen today, he's got a great sense of humour with it.
Just awesome. Like, did his New Zealand Society paper last semester and just thoroughly enjoyed it. It was great going to the lectures. He just makes them fun and enjoyable, and you can, like, it makes you want to go and listen to and hear what he's got to say, and you take everything on board that he's saying.
He's totally irreverent. Absolutely. He's got no patience with political correctness, which, I mean, it can be a little bit off-putting, but he always engages with issues. Rather, he's not just being provocative, he is actually engaging with ideas.
I was one of those obnoxious little kids who, whenever I was told to do something or to believe something, I would immediately say, why? And that gets amplified when you're an adolescent. And then when you discover sociology at university, which encourages you to keep up this childish or teenage behaviour and to constantly ask why, well, it just encourages you. So I've done it all my life, and all my life I've irritated people.
Starting out full of promise as a child, Peter grew into a somewhat introverted and alienated teenager, with a leaning towards the theatrical.
I was an oddball, and so I aggravated my initial alienation from the world, which was a matter of a visual impairment, by adopting the pose, if you like, of an extreme eccentric, and also someone who didn't care a damn about anything. I was moderately good at schoolwork when I started off in primary school, but as I went through secondary school, I did less and less work, and I took a kind of perverse pleasure in failing even at the things I was good at. I wouldn't admit it to myself at the time, but I can see blindingly obviously now that it really wasn't a philosophical stance. It was because I had become massively alienated from the world and from myself by the fact that I was going blind. I had a thing called retinitis pigmentosa, which cuts out your peripheral vision, cuts out your night vision, and over the top of that I had cataracts, which cut out my vision in the sunlight. I hated the sun, I hated the summer. There was just a brief period at dawn and at dusk when I could see moderately clearly, although it was really only peering at the world through a keyhole. I was on a massive self-destructive binge. I had a little nervous breakdown, and I ended up in a padded cell for a few weeks, and I took time off from life generally, and I used to write poetry full of adolescent angst. I identified myself with Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I used to write these passionately self-loathing poems. Has some chilling wind from space swept dust away from glass, and must you fiercely scowling see your own reflected eyes? See, could Esmeralda, she, the dream, could she descend to your inept embrace? Our savage Quasimodo, tear your face, claw the city, flay the wolfish world, while dizzy buildings bleed, while glaring eyes of sun and moon will roll and glare again. Ah, yes, you feel the pain. Go and beat the sacred bell and exorcise all demon thoughts of mirrored, crippled self. And I used to go around muttering this stuff to myself, enjoying it immensely. The crippled self in question wasn't me, the person with a visual impairment. It was me with cancer of the soul. I felt myself to be an unpleasant little goblin or orc crouching inside a reasonably presentable 6-foot robot. I tried psychology, but psychology gave you no answers. Psychology told you how to torment white rats and torment pigeons by putting them in mazes or getting them to tap bars. But it didn't really tell me what had got out of kilter between me and the outside world. And that's what sociology did. Then my life took a totally new and unexpected turn because I came across a novel called Voss. And I was absolutely riveted by this book because it was about Antipodean realities, our part of the world, if you like. But it injected a strange, haunting, mystical element into our life, which I hadn't found in New Zealand in the 1950s and 1960s. I was very, very fortunate and privileged in the end making friends with Patrick White. My thesis was about Patrick White's religious philosophy. And I was very fortunate that the year I finished it, he got the Nobel Prize, and a publisher was desperately looking for something to publish on Patrick White because nobody had written any books about him. And so I got my thesis published as a book called The Eye in the Mandala, a very Jungian title, Religious Philosophy in the Novels of Patrick White.
Having completed his doctorate at Oxford, it was a case of over the channel to France and further challenges.
So I found myself in 1973 living in Aix-en-Provence in the south of France. I was an illegal overstayer. I wasn't supposed to be there. So to justify my existence, I enrolled for another doctorate, this time in sociology. I did it initially just to give me a bit of money. I got another scholarship, a French government scholarship, and I got a student card so I could stay there. But I had to find a subject for this doctorate. And by this time, my eyesight had finally evaporated. The last visual image I can remember is of a red eyeball peering out at me from the fog of a mirror. I was standing there by the mirror with my eye pressed up to it, desperately trying to see myself. And all I could see was this forlorn eye gazing back at me. Then I could see nothing. I decided that I'd make a meal of this and do the doctorate on other blind people, that I would explore my blindness by going out and talking to as many blind people as I possibly could. So I spent about 3 years going around and talking to members of the blind community in Marseille and Aix-en-Provence. It was a fascinating period. I got to know a side of that city's life. And Marseille in itself is a fascinating city, a big, bad, naughty city like the Chicago of France. And I was meeting all these blind people and discovering the underground world of the blind community that not many people knew about. They occupied every position on the social hierarchy. The most remarkable was a young man called Bertrand, who had been a child prodigy. He got the equivalent of our scholarship when he was 15. He'd been totally blind since birth, but he was a brilliant concert pianist. And I met him when he was 17 or 18. I interviewed him, and then he asked me if I'd like him to play something. So I said, yes, and he said, what? And I thought, well, I'll try you out, you bugger. And I asked him to play a particularly difficult piece by Bartók. Bartók is a very difficult composer. He didn't blink. He sat down and he played it from beginning to end, superbly. He came from an upper class family. At the other end of the scale, I used to go around with a tape recorder talking to street beggars. There was Pierrot, who played an old wheezy accordion and begged for a living, and told me that I should be ashamed of myself for being a parasite, a student, when I could play the flute. Why wasn't I out there on the streets of Marseille, earning a respectable living for myself like he was? So there was Pierrot and the Canebière, the main drag in Marseille, and there was Clo-Clo, a block down, Cloco was a blind transvestite who wore a sprightly black curly